صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله صلى الله عليك وعلى آل بيتك المعصومين المظلومين صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله الحسين يا غريب يا مظلوم كربلاء يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة ما خاب والله من تمسك بكم وأمنا من لجأ إليكم سادتي يا ليتنا ثم يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز فوزا عظيما غريب كربلاء estranged on the land of Karbala مظلوم Karbala oppressed on the land of Karbala Shaheed Karbala. One more time, let the Imam hear you. غريب Karbala estranged on the land of Karbala مظلوم Karbala oppressed on the land of Karbala Shaheed Karbala martyred on the land of Karbala. Assalamu ala al-Husayn wa ala Ali ibn al-Husayn wa ala awlad al-Husayn wa ala ashab al-Husayn wa ala alladhina badhalu mawjahum duna al-Husayn wa rahmatullahi وبركاته صلوات. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the chapter of Hujurat, and what he says is the truth. In chapter 49 verse 10, Allah says, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. Surely the believers are nothing other than friends. Brothers, I should say. صدق الله العلي العظيم. آمنا بالله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. The concept of friendship and loyalty are extremely important to the human condition. Our very social fabric is based upon the relationships that we have with those individuals within our household, our community, and society as a whole. How is it that we are able to establish good relationships, such as friendships? And why is it that some friendships have more loyalty than others? And why is it that some friendships last more than others? And how important is friendship when it comes to my own sense of not just social position, but also my sense of psychological and mental health? And what does Islam tell me about friendship? And is everybody that I friend on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram, are those truly my friends or not? How is it that I can differentiate between a good friend and a bad friend? And how is it that I can establish a long-lasting friendship? These are all topics that we will attempt to cover in this lecture. We'll look at friendship and loyalty from a logical perspective, from an academic perspective, and then finally from an Islamic perspective. Now, logically speaking, we know that friendships are something that are important to us as human beings. We know that we're proud when we say that a person is my friend. There's a sense of association and a sense of camaraderie that is created when I meet someone. The problem is that too many times I may label someone as a friend when in reality they're merely an acquaintance. And so I know that logically speaking, if I were really to, if I was going to analyze my relationships with those who I quote and unquote say or call friends, I would really find that they fall into several categories, depending on level. Some who are an acquaintance, some who are my colleagues in school, others who are my colleagues at work, others who are um, friends, quote unquote, others who I consider as companions, and then those whom I consider as brothers or sisters, depending on the gender. So each one is at a different level. An acquaintance is someone that I just met. Now, all too often in class or in school, we classify someone as being a friend when in reality they're merely an acquaintance. Now, how can I differentiate between the two? So if I talk to somebody in school and I quote unquote befriend them, my friendship, if it's at a surface level, whereby I only meet them every now and then in class, and I don't gather with them or congregate with them outside of class, then that person is merely an acquaintance. But you might say that there are those who I congregate with and I don't know that well. And though I may classify them as being friends, in actual fact, they're still an acquaintance. I might be more acquainted with them than the person that I have a surface relationship with, but they're still considered an acquaintance. So when then does a person get classified as being a friend? You see, at work, for example, I know that there are colleagues that I have at work. We have mutual interests, and we may sit or stand or congregate at the water fountain and talk about the game that and the score from last night, or um, uh, the news, for example, or the latest political situation. And so these people are considered my colleagues. We do have shared interests. However, our interests aren't at that level where we can say that um, there is a loyalty that has been established between us. And this is where all too often we find, even in TV shows, that individuals that are colleagues at work, one minute they're a good colleague, and the next minute they're backbiting and speaking behind their backs. And so one of the ways that we can judge or determine whether a person is really a friend or a colleague is also where I meet them, how much time I spend with them, and also the amount of information that they know about me, that I know about them, and how I use it, and whether I have a sense of loyalty towards them or not. And that brings us to the third category, who is the friend. A friend is a person who I have a mutual understanding on many things. We agree on many things. We see eye to eye on many things. And so that person I would consider to be my friend. Now, can I be friends with someone who I don't share any similarities with? In reality, I can't really be a friend per se with someone unless I share certain commonalities with them. Now, these commonalities can be anything from sports to deeper emotions. If it was just sports, then that person would be just an acquaintance, right? A sports player. But a person who is considered a friend is someone who you connect with on a deeper, more emotional level. Now, once I understand that, then I understand that if I look at these past three categorizations, whether they're an acquaintance or a colleague or a friend, I know that I connect with a friend at a greater and higher level than I do with the other two. Okay? Now, what about a companion? What is the difference between a friend and a companion? Now, these two words can be used as synonyms. However, companion implies that that person is always in your companionship, right? You're always together all the time. You know, I had a friend, I remember, um, who was always with me. Wherever we go, we had many similarities in common. We had many shared interests. And it's these very shared interests in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in self improvement, in becoming a better human being, in being a better servant leader, that we were able to establish this friendship and one level above, companionship. And this companionship was so much so that when people would see us apart, they'd ask each one of us, you know, where's your brother? So then that companionship is really a brotherhood, right? Now, I can be a companion to someone by accompanying them, but unless I have shared interests with them, I won't actually be a full-fledged companion. And the higher the level of companionship, the closer I am to brotherhood with that person. And the brotherhood or the sisterhood, depending on your gender, is really what I thrive for as a human being. I know that I feel a sense of loneliness when I can't share my ideas with someone. When that person that I share my ideas with and my interests might not be interested in the very same things. That person that I click with and I connect with, right, who makes me feel comfortable with myself, right, and makes me feel normal, and makes me feel like I can tell them whatever it is that I feel, and I can fully trust them. So there is then an element of trust in a brotherhood or a sisterhood that is established between two people. Not just that, I know that I'm relieved when I see that friend. I know that I feel comfortable. I have a friend who is a teacher of mine. And when I hear his voice, it gives me comfort. It pacifies me, right? If I am stressed. That's what a companion does. A companion, especially a high-level companion who's a brother to you or a sister to you, they bring you comfort, right? They make you feel as though you're at home. And this is why we find in modern society that many children, youth specifically, in their own households, they don't feel a sense of friendship or camaraderie with their own brothers and sisters. Now, of course, with the advent of any sort of calamity or tragedy or a major life event, such as, for example, corona or loss of a loved one, we find that we become closer to the companions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed in our lives, specifically the closest people to us, those who we've grown up with, our own siblings, right? And that usually what ends up happening is many of us, we appreciate other friends more than we appreciate our own siblings. And we don't really appreciate them until something happens where we may move away or an incident occurs, as I mentioned, that causes us to have a greater appreciation for them, because they're the only ones that end up staying. They're the only ones who will maintain our secrets or keep our secrets. Of course, there's an exception to every rule, right? But it's important for us to understand that I know, logically speaking, that these people have been placed in my life for me to understand companionship and camaraderie and trust and loyalty, right? Which come part and parcel with those last three levels of or classifications that we mentioned: the friendship, the companionship, and the brotherhood between two individuals. Now let's look at what the academicians say. What do the social psychologists tell us? And I've brought some studies that I thought would be useful in understanding friendship and loyalty. And I want to cite a study done by Viviana Amati et al. And she says that friendship, in terms of intensity, is measured by frequency with which individuals see their friends. So this is how they actually define a friendship. that the more the person intensely or intensifies seeing that friend, the greater their friendship will be, right? And also quality of that relationship. And that's measured by the satisfaction with which the friendship and the relationship gives. So then, quality of the friendship and intensity of the friendship is what she actually studied. And what she found was that it's positively associated with life satisfaction. So then, this modern study shows that in order for one to be satisfied with their life, that friendship is an essential part of that. And that in order for that life satisfaction to occur, then there has to be an intensification or of the of seeing each other, seeing that friend and talking to them or communicating with them. So the greater the frequency of communication, the greater the intensity of the friendship, and also the greater the quality of that relationship. So if we're only talking about surface things, or we're only going to the movies, for example, we're not really talking about real issues, sharing our emotions with each other, then that doesn't really constitute a friendship that is satisfactory to us, right? And we've all gone through such friendships. So that means then there is a need for friendship in our lives. If indeed a good friendship gives us life satisfaction. So a study done in the University of Michigan found that when women feel emotionally close to other women, their bodies actually produce a hormone called progesterone. And that hormone boosts their mood and it alleviates stress. And therefore, friendship then becomes a very handy survival kit, if ever there was one, according to that study. Now the question is, how can I predict whether a friendship is sustainable or not? Now there's a study that was recently published that aimed to find out the answer to that very question. And so what that study did was that it actually studied seventh graders and it focused on adolescence. Now, we all know that during our adolescent years, a very tumultuous period of our lives that is filled with turmoil and tribulation and drama, right? And so most likely what would happen is, I'm going to befriend someone intensely, or I'm going to fall out of a friendship with them intensely, right? That's usually what happens in the adolescent years. So what the study wanted to do is it wanted to determine what were the factors that caused the longevity of a friendship. And they studied that time period from adolescence. So they looked at seventh graders and they surveyed 100 seventh graders. And after that, they basically studied them up until 12th grade. And the students would give them an update on the state of their friendships every year. Overall, this study found that only 25% of seventh graders' friendships lasted into the next year, only 25%. And only 1% actually lasted through to 12th grade. So that tells you then that friendships from within the adolescence and teenage years, they don't last. Only 1% lasted from 7th grade to 12th grade. And you and I both know that when we're in 12th grade, we're always arguing with my parents. No, this person is my friend. You don't understand. They understand me, right? They know me. They know me better than even my own family. I can tell them everything, right? And look at that. From 7th grade up until 12th grade, only 1% last. And I'm curious to see if there's a study. I didn't find a study about the longevity of friendships from 12th grade into college and past that. I'd be interested to see what it actually says, because from my experience in dealing with others as well as with my own experience, what I found in actual fact is that most of the relationships that were established in high school, they don't last to adulthood. It's very rare that that actually happens, unless there are family relationships or family friendships already pre-established. Now, what then contributes to the success of that 1% is the next question that we may ask. And the secret is similarity. So it turns out that similarity is extremely important in friendship. that the more a friendship is more likely to dissolve when friends of different genders or physical aggressiveness or school ability and social status differ, right? So if they differ in these aspects, uh, then what ends up happening is their friendship doesn't last. However, if they are similar in these things, for example, if you look at the athletes, right? The athletes are usually friends, and some say friends for life. Why? Because they have a shared interest, right? And they're always together when it comes to athletic events, correct? And sometimes they talk about deep issues. Okay, so that means then that I need to surround myself with friends that have similar interests as me. Now, also, let's not forget a very important factor when it comes to longevity of a relationship. Longevity is really um, based upon not only the shared interests, right? But there has to be a level of loyalty there. So, um, it, according to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, loyalty is seen as a virtue, albeit a problematic one, they state. Why is it a problematic one? Because someone who is loyal to you will always tell you their opinion, right? And so the tumultuous relationship that occurs within the adolescent years to the teenage years is because we're trying to, remove from our lives any sort of negativity. So a person who would come to us, who maybe I've known since grade school, right? And they come and see that I'm moving in the wrong path, and I've changed my friends, and I've forgotten the good childhood friends, and I'm walking with the wrong crowd or the wrong clique. What ends up happening is that they care for me enough to tell me that what I'm doing is wrong. But what do? I accuse them of either being jealous or envious, or they don't understand, right? And I might even end that relationship. And that's why it becomes problematic. Okay? Loyalty can become problematic. However, loyalty is essential to a true relationship. Now, of course, there's a famous book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And this is a very famous book that was written many years ago, I believe in the 1960s or 1950s, by Dale Carnegie. And he mentions important factors and aspects and criteria that help us not just win friends, but also maintain that friendship and have influence upon them. And he mentions that one should not criticize or condemn or complain, right? That about the other person. That one should give honest and sincere appreciation. I should always show appreciation to my friends. And I need to arouse in the other person an eager want. And he says that there are 6 ways to make people like you: to be genuine and genuinely interested in them, to smile. Nobody likes to be around people who are always angry or disgruntled or sad. They think they're a downer, so they tend to stay away from them. He also says, remember that a person's name to that person is the sweetest and most important sound in any language. So when you mention that person's name, they love to hear it, which is an interesting psychological effect. He also says, be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. He also says, talk in terms of the other person's interests, not your own. So don't be selfish with the information, and with just sharing your own emotions and not caring about the others. So that it doesn't become a one-sided relationship. It becomes a relationship that is reciprocal. He also says, make the other person feel important by being sincere with them. And he says that you will win people to your way of thinking if you do the following: that the only way to get the best of an argument is actually to avoid it. Yeah. So that means then that when I deliver information to the person, if I don't like what they're doing, then there's got to be a better way to relay the information to them, right? I can't be confrontational with them. I have to figure out what is the right time, what is the right place, and what is the right way to say what I need to say to them. Now, Show respect, he says, for the other person's opinion. Never say to them you're wrong. Nobody likes to be told that they're wrong. Even if they are truly wrong, there's always a better way to tell them. Right? And if you are wrong when you're dealing with them, then admit it. Right? Admit it quickly, admit it emphatically, and apologize for it. And begin in a friendly way. Always, when you talk to your friends, always begin in a friendly way. Get the other person saying yes immediately, and let the other person do a great deal of the talking. Listen more. So zip this, open these up. And let the other person feel like their idea is worthwhile. And try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. So be empathetic towards the person. And also be sympathetic with the other person's ideas and desires, and appeal to their nobler motives. Right? And dramatize your ideas. And he says, and then he speaks about how to be a leader, how to change people without giving offense or arousing resentment in them. And he gives several points. He says, begin by praising them, show them honest appreciation, call attention to people's mistakes indirectly, not directly. Talk about your own mistakes before criticizing that person. Ask questions, he says, instead of giving direct orders. Don't be a bossy person. And let the other person save face. Right? Don't out them. And then he says, also praise the slightest of improvements. And be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise, he says. And give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. Hold them to a higher standard. Tell them that what your expectations are of them. Right? And use always encouragement. Make the faults seem easy to correct. And make the other person happy about doing the thing that you suggest. So now we move on to the Islamic perspective. And we started with a beautiful verse number 10 of chapter of Hujurat, chapter 49, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. So we're looking at إِنَّمَا, which is composed of two words that have been merged into one, inna, which means surely, a tool of emphasis, and ma, which is a tool of negation. When placed together, they become a tool of confinement, a tool of definition. Right? It defines now the state of a mu'min, what a mu'min and another mu'min are to each other. Right? They are nothing other than brothers. So then in Islam, what we seek is not just to be acquainted with one another, right? As in the verse that we quoted in the last lecture, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَىٰ وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِندَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. O people, we created you as male and female and made you tribes and nations so that you may be acquainted with one another. Surely the best of you in the eyes of Allah, proverbially speaking, are those who are pious, those who are God-fearing. So when the best of the best get together, those who are pious and God-fearing, when they come together, these mu'mineen, what are they to one another? This is the greatest relationship that can ever be established by anyone, according to Islam. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. That surely believers to each other are nothing other than brothers and sisters. Now, we know that this system of brotherhood and sisterhood with one another is usually something that's referred to from a biological standpoint, right? Meaning that when I call someone my brother, that usually means that he's my brother, biologically speaking. But when I call a friend of mine a brother, then that speaks volumes to the level of that relationship. Because brothers are loyal to one another. Brothers support each other. Brothers help each other be better individuals and human beings. Brothers care for one another, ask about one another, right? Advise each other, consult each other. confide in one another. There's nothing better than having a brother or a sister, especially in faith. Why? Because what brings us together is that similarity. What is that commonality that we have? It is our sincerity to Allah. And that is why Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq salamullahi alayhi, he says it beautifully. And this hadith is mentioned in the book Al-Haqa'iq fi al-Khala'iq by Al-Fayd al-Kashani, who wrote this book in the last 2 months of his life while he was on his deathbed. The very last hadith that he cites within that book, in the last page, he says that there are 3 things that decrease over the span of time. He says, Imra'atun alifatun fi dinillah, a woman that has an affinity towards the religion of Allah. He says, al-ukhuwatu fi din, brotherhood in religion. And he says, al-waladu rashid, righteously guided child. And then he says, he who receives any of these 3, any one of these 3, فَقَدْ نَالَ خَيْرَ الدَّارَيْنِ, he who is able to attain one of these 3 has been able or will have been able to attain the best of this world and the hereafter. So then one of our major prerogatives and life goals is not only to marry a woman that is religious, but also to have a child that is religious, to raise him well, and of course to have brotherhood in religion. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ, surely brothers are nothing other than, or mu'mins, believers, nothing other than brothers. And so I must care for my brother just as I care for myself. Now if you recall from the very first series, when we said that Allah the Unlimited created us, and since He is all perfect, then we have worth. He gave us our worth. And that means that I don't look to any other human being to determine my self-worth and my value, right? And my self-esteem comes from Him. He gave me life, and everything around me also has worth. And therefore, I must appreciate it just as Allah appreciates it. But how much more will I appreciate a person who shares that sensibility as well? Right? That love for Allah, that allegiance to His representatives. قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. In Shura 24, say, I do not ask you for anything other than you showing loyalty and love and caring and kindness to my near kin. Now, what do we learn from Ahlul Bayt? And this is what I'd like to cover now. I'd like to take a deep dive into the right of the companion. And Imam Sajjad salamullah alayhi, who is the legacy that Imam Hussein salawatullahi wa salamuhu left for us. If I want to know what Imam Hussein salamullah alayhi, I need to look at what Imam Zayn al-Abidin left me. He left me the Treaties of Rights. He left me a Sahifa Sajjadiyah. I need to make sure that I have these books in my library. I need to make sure it's on my phone. I need to make sure that every day I sit and I read a little of each of these books. Now, the Treaties of Rights is basically our Islamic Bill of Rights. And if each one of us teaches our kids from a very early age and discusses these concepts with our family members, then we'll know the value of everything. The Imam tells us this. Now, in this Treaties of Rights, the Imam Salamullahi alayhi says that a friend has a right upon you. He says, وَأَمَّا حَقُّ الصَّاحِبِ فَأَنْ تَصْحَبَهُ بِالْفَضْلِ مَا وَجَدْتَ إِلَيْهِ سَبِيلًا. That when you, means that you accompany him. Bil-fadl, meaning in favor and virtue. In as much as you are able to, be virtuous with him. Treat him righteously. Don't hold favors over his head. Give him of your favors. And then what does the Imam say? He says, وَإِلَّا فَلَا أَقَلَّ مِنْ الْإِنصَافِ. If you can't one-up him in favor, then at the very least, he says, be fair to him. Give him his due right. And then he says, وَأَن تُكْرِمَهُ كَمَا يُكْرِمُكَ. That what you should do is when he is gracious to you, then you must be gracious in the same amount to him. وَتَحْفَظْهُ كَمَا يَحْفَظُكَ. And that what you have to do is you have to preserve him, right? Protect him, just as he protects you. وَلَا يَسْبِقَكَ فِيمَا بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَهُ مِنْ مَكْرُمَةٍ. And make sure that you hasten and that you're to be gracious to him before he is gracious to you. The level of caring that the Imam tells me I have to maintain as a right, that I should be the first one bil mubadara. I should be the first one to be kind. I should be the first one to be benevolent. I should be the first one to be generous, right? I should be the first one to make him feel good about himself or about herself. I need to be the initiator in order for me to give that friend, that companion, his right, that brother in Islam and in Iman. فَإِن سَبَقَكَ. What if he hastens and he is able to beat me to the good deed? He says, كَافَأْتَهُ. فَإِن سَبَقَكَ كَافَأْتَهُ. If he hastens and beats you to the good deed, then you have to reward him. Then what does he say? He says, وَلَا تُقَصِّرْ بِهِ عَمَّا يَسْتَحِقُّ مِنَ الْمَوَدَّةِ. There's that word, mawaddah. Be deficient in that which he deserves from you when it comes to mawaddah. And what is mawaddah? Mawaddah includes the loyalty, the allegiance, the love, the kindness, the caring. Right? All of these packaged in one word, mawaddah. Comes from the word wood. And the meme here, meme masdari, which means that you become the source of the love and the kindness and the caring and the mercy and the allegiance and the loyalty. And then what does he say? He says, تَلْزَمْ نَفْسَكَ نَصِيحَتَهُ. He says, hold yourself to a standard that it is your responsibility to advise him, to admonish him. وَحِيَاطَتَهُ. And to warn him from falling into wrongdoing, or to protect him by warning him from falling into or dealing with other individuals that may hurt him. وَمُعَاضَدَتَهُ عَلَى طَاعَةِ رَبِّهِ. And to support him to be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَعُونَتَهُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ. And to help him when it comes to nafs and him dealing with the nafs al-ammara bis-su', right? The nafs that commands do ill, that has materialistic tendencies. I need to be like a mirror. Al-mu'minu mir'atul mu'min, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq says. That a believer is a reflection of his brother believer. And he reflects to him, right, the kindness and the love. Then he says, وَمَعُونَتَهُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ فِيمَا لَا يَهُمُّ بِهِ مِنْ مَعْصِيَةِ رَبِّهِ. So help him in those things that keep him away from being disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he says, ثُمَّ تَكُونُ عَلَيْهِ رَحْمَةً. And then to him you must be a source of subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he says, ثُمَّ تَكُونُ عَلَيْهِ رَحْمَةً. And then to him you must be a source of mercy. وَلَا تَكُونُ عَلَيْهِ عَذَابًا. And do not be a source of torture to him. Don't aggravate him. Don't hurt him. And then he says, وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. And you will not be able to achieve these rights without seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In order to give him his due right, I have to have that sincerity to Allah, ask Allah Almighty to help me, and then only through Allah's help, and Ahlul Bayt, from the words of Imam As-Sajjad salamullah alayhi, will I be successful in giving the companion that right. Look at how many rights he has upon me, and how my relationship must be with that companion. And this is the gauge that if my friend does not do all of these things that the Imam al-Sajjad mentions to me in the Treaties of Rights, in this specific right of the companion, then know that that person is not your friend. That this is the gauge, this is the measure of the friendship. If I am lacking these things in a friendship, then know that that person is not your friend or companion. And so it becomes important for us to understand that when Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen Salamullahi alayhi says, Al-mar'u ala dini khalilih, that a person follows the religion, meaning the belief system of their friends, then I know that I have to be, and I have to ensure that I am in good company, in the company of the Mu'mineen. And this is exactly what Imam al-Hussein Salamullahi alayhi. We don't have to have a lot of quantity, is not what is required. It's quality. Salman. لا تقولوا سلمان الفارسي قولوا سلمان المحمدي سلمان منا أهل البيت. Do not say Salman the Persian, say Salman the Muhammadan. Salman is of us, O Ahl al-Bayt. Look at that level of companionship that he's become of Ahl al-Bayt. He's that close. Why? Because إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. Because surely the believers are nothing other than brothers to one another. And so he became of them. Ammar ibn Yasir, al-Maqdad, right? And the Imam al-Hussein, his companions around him, Habib ibn Mudahir, Muslim ibn Aous, right? Han ibn Urwa, Burayr, Abis, Al-Hur, companions that were willing to give their lives for their Imam. The loyalty, the mawaddah. Let's go back to Kaaba. They say, brothers and sisters, that Imam Hussein Salamullahi alayhi, the first that he would send out into the battlefield were his companions. The first to actually go out and to be martyred in the way of Allah would be Al-Hurr al-Riyahi. Now Al-Hurr, we have to understand his story. Al-Hurr was actually dispatched with 1,000 men to stress Imam Salamullahi alayhi and the Holy Household as he was on his way to Kufa, to divert him from Kufa so that he would end up in Karbala. On the way to Kufa, Imam Salamullahi alayhi would see these troops and would stop at the river and set up camp so that they can drink water and rest. And he was in the way of the troops stopping and getting their rest and taking their horses to water. So what does the Imam do? He brings water to them and he opens up the way for them to drink from the river. A privilege that was not given to him on the day of Ashura and in the first 10 days of Muharram. And so we find that Al-Hurr, when he was speaking to Umar ibn Sa'd at the very beginning of the battle before it ensued, he looked at him and he said to him, are we really going to do this? He says, Umar ibn Sa'd says, yes. The least of which you will see heads being severed and arms and limbs being cut off. Al-Hurr, he says that I was confused. I didn't know what I was going to do at that point. I knew that this would be a losing battle for me. Not in this physical world, but in the hereafter. Wallahi inni la ukhayyiru nafsi bayna al-jannah wal nar. Surely I am choosing between heaven and hellfire with this decision I'm about to make. How can I stand in the face of the grandson of the Prophet of Allah? And so what he does is he leaves the factions of Umar ibn Sa'd and he gallops to the camp of Imam al-Hussein. He falls off the horse to the feet of Imam al-Hussein Salamullahi alayhi and he kisses them. And he begs the Imam Salamullahi alayhi saying, هل من مغفرة? Is there any forgiveness for a lowly such as myself? Imam Salamullahi alayhi. Look at how merciful the Imam is. Because he read the sincerity in Al-Hurr heart. He places his hand on his head and he says to him, of course there is forgiveness for you. At that point, Al-Hurr truly became liberated. When he liberated himself from materialism, that's when he truly became free. And so, just as I was the first to prevent you and your family from comfort as you are on your way to this battle, Al-Hurr would get up on his horse and he would make his way to the battlefield. He would fight valiantly, brothers and sisters, only to be slaughtered on the land of Karbala. They say companion after companion would go out into the battlefield as the Imam would send them out, and they would fight valiantly. But to no avail, because the numbers that they were fighting against were huge. Even though they would be able to kill 30, 40, because they were such voracious warriors, so ferocious on the battlefield, like lions. But at the end of the road, they were outnumbered. Habis would go out. From his love for Imam Hussein salamullah alayhi, he would run into the battlefield, and it's narrated and reported that he would say, Hubb al-Hussein ajannani. The love of al-Hussein has made me insane. You find that newlyweds were sending out their husbands, and mothers were sending out their sons to fight for Hussein salamullahi alayhi. They say Muslim ibn Aous would go out into the battlefield and he would fight valiantly only to be struck to the ground. And Imam al-Hussein salamullahi alayhi with Habib ibn Mudahir would go towards Muslim ibn Aous. And as they approached him, they say that the Imam salamullahi alayhi was deeply saddened by the sight of Muslim as he was fighting for his last breaths. Muslim ibn Aous would look towards Habib ibn Mudahir, and Habib would say to him, if I didn't know that my fate would be exactly the same as yours in a few minutes, I would tell you to tell me what your last will and testament is so that I can fulfill it for you. And what does Muslim do? Even at the very last minute, his loyalty for the Imam, his mawadda for the Imam, he points towards the Imam al-Hussein salamullah, and he says, the that I ask of you, O Habib, is to protect this man. Muslim would take his last breath and he would die on the land of Karbala. And then Habib ibn Mudahir would go into the battlefield. Who was Habib? Habib was a great general. He was much older in age. They say he was so old that in order to keep his eyebrows from falling onto his cheeks, that he would tie them with a bandana. He was a great general who had fought alongside Imam Ali salamullahi alayhi in many battles and many wars. Habib came late to the battle. They were waiting for him, and he was a flag bearer as well on one of the flanks of the troops of the Imam salamullahi alayhi. They say that when he came galloping to the camp, before he came, that the Imam was asked by many that they take on his flank. But the Imam would say, no, there's only one man who has this responsibility. And when they would see and hear the galloping and the cloud of dust that would ensue, everybody would say, who is this who's coming? Sayyidah Zainab would ask, who's this who's coming? The children would ask, who's this that's coming? And they would say, Habib ibn Mudahir has arrived. And Sayyidah Zainab would say, tell Habib that I send him my salams. And when the salams are delivered to Habib ibn Mudahir, what does he say? He takes the sand of Karbala and he throws it on his face. He says, who am I for Sayyidah Zainab to mention my name on her holy tongue and to send me her salams? Look at the loyalty, look at the respect, look at how he dignifies Sayyidah Zainab and Ahl al-Bayt. Habib ibn Mudahir would go out into the battlefield. He would fight valiantly like the other companions, only to be found. And when Imam Hussein salamullahi alayhi would see him on the land of Karbala, hurt and suffering, about to take his last breath, the Imam would approach him with his head down to the ground as though at that point his back was broken. He approaches Habib ibn Mudahir, he holds him in his hands. Habib would take his last breath and he would die on the land of Karbala. هل من مناد ينادي وحبيبا وحسينا ومظلوما وشهيدا. At this point, who was there? Who was there to stand by the Imam? It was the men of Ahlul Bayt. Only now the men of Ahlul Bayt would remain. The Imam, it's narrated and reported that he would look out into the battlefield and he would call out to his men. He would say, Ya Habib, Ya Burayr, Ya Muslim, is there anyone to help us? هل من ذاب يذب عن حرم رسول الله? Is there someone who will protect the holy household of Allah? Get up, O men. Get up, rise, so that you can stand by us and protect us. But no one would respond. They had all been martyred on the land of Karbala. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Assalamu ala al-Husayn wa ala Ali ibn al-Husayn wa ala awlad al-Husayn wa ala ashab al-Husayn wa ala alladhina badalu muhajahum duna al-Husayn wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Oh Allah, we ask you and we beseech you that you accept what little we offered on this night, that you give health to our sick, and there are many who are sick from around the world, whether it's in Najaf or in Karbala or in Kuwait or in London or in Canada, whether in Niagara Falls, our dear community there, or in Toronto or in Vancouver, or whether it's in Chicago or Dearborn. Everybody is asking for your dua. Or whether it's in Australia, everybody is asking for your dua. And these are the nights in which Allah will accept our dua. So remember all those who need your dua, from your neighbors and your brothers and your sisters around the world. For surely the believers are nothing other than brothers and sisters to one another. And that becomes their right upon us to remember them in dua. There are many who are sick who require your dua. Please remember them. My neighbor Abu Naeem, my father, Dr. Sami Asfar, my dear teacher in Najaf. Many people require your dua. Our Maraja, remember them in your dua. Grand Ayatollah Sistani, remember him in your dua. Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id al-Hakim, Sheikh Ishaq al-Fayyad, Ayatollah Wahid al-Khurasani. Remember them all in your dua. All of our teachers in the Hawzat, right? Remember all of them in your dua. They are in need of your dua. Remember the orphans. Don't forget the orphans in these nights. These are the nights of the orphans. These are the nights in which the children of Karbala are prepping to become orphans. Remember to support the orphans. Support Al Ain Social Care Foundation. Support the orphans in Lebanon, the orphans in Pakistan, the orphans in Afghanistan. Support the orphans around the world. There are many who require our support around the world. Oh Allah, we ask you and we beseech you that you repay the debts of all those who are in debt, that you bestow your mercy upon our deceased, that you help the founders of the Niagara Falls community and those around the world, those who have made majalis like this possible for their community. Oh Allah, support them. Ya Arhamar Rahimin. Allow them to continue to do so. Oh Allah, remove this waba, this pandemic from us, so that we can go back to being together, inshallah, and serving and seeing each other. Oh Allah, allow us to be successful in these majalis in our homes with our families, Ya Arhamar Rahimin. Allah, accept what little we offer and hasten the appearance of Imam al-Hujjah Salamullahi alayhi, and allow us to serve under him, Ya Arhamar Rahimin. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين والفاتحة على أرواح المرحومين مسبوقة مشفوعة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد صلوات الله عليه وسلم.